All right. So here we go. Bob Dylan's 15th studio album, which was recorded between in September and December in 1974. Part of it was recorded in New York. The other part was recorded in Minnesota. I'll go over that in just a little bit. It was released on January 20th, 1975. We last covered Dylan in Season 1, Episode 29 with Highway 61 Revisited, but we've also covered plenty of other albums from the 60s, including The Freewheelin', Times Are A-Changin', Bringing It All Back Home, Highway 61 Revisited, Blonde on Blonde, John Wesley Harding, and Nashville Skyline.
Jeez.
This guy... Yeah, he's always at the top with the rankings. So Nashville Skyline was the last album that we covered chronologically. And between that album and this one, Dylan released 5 other studio records.
Jesus.
So that includes Self-Portrait, New Morning, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, Dylan, and Planet Waves. So this
Have you
period,
heard those albums?
No.
Okay.
Nope. No, I haven't. And yeah, these albums are not considered Dylan's greatest achievements. I think there's some reasons why we're not covering them. The reviews at the time were not so great. People were a little baffled. And Dylan, I mean, talk about somebody zigging when they should be zagging, or people expecting them to. Dylan certainly was one of those people. After the release of Self-Portrait, Rolling Stone writer Greil Marcus asked, "What is this shit?" So, so Dylan, yeah, he had some, exploratory phases that did not end up doing well commercially or critically. Also during this time, in this period, Dylan recorded with George Harrison for All Things Must Pass. He participated in Harrison's concert for Bangladesh in New York City. And he did do the soundtrack for Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid with the single Knockin' on Heaven's Door. So, I mean, he was still producing songs that, people know fairly well, but the albums themselves didn't do so well.
And he was in the movie, too.
And he was in the movie, that's right, yes. He signed to a new label in 1973 after Columbia. This record company was called Asylum Records, and he did release 2 albums with them. And in 1975, he was joined by the band for a 40-date tour of the United States, which was his first tour in 7 years. And some of the recordings from this concert can be heard in the double album Before the Flood, which was released right before this, I think. Also, not just another live album, but another greatest hits album was released during this time as well, in addition to the studio records that he had done. Yep.
He's already got greatest hits.
He's got 2 by the time Blood on the Tracks comes out. So he returns to Columbia Records after poor sales of the previous 2 records, and at the end of his tour with the band, he starts a relationship with Columbia employee Ellen Bernstein, and this has been described the beginning of the end of his marriage to his wife Sarah, who many people say that this album Blood on the Tracks is about. This is a divorce album about Dylan's breakup with his wife. Even Jacob Dylan from the Wallflowers, who is the child of both Bob Dylan and Sarah Dylan, says that basically when he hears this record, he is hearing the breakup of his parents' marriage. But Bob Dylan kind of refutes some of these claims that this album is about his divorce. He says that this is the inspiration from the album actually came from a painter named Norman Rabin, who Dylan took some classes in New York City with, and this painter Norman Rabin inspired Dylan to look at life with a new outlook and a new concept of time, trying to marriage the present, the past, and the future, kind of all at around the same time. And so,
and he called it Blood on the Tracks.
Yes,
that's what he came up with. Okay, gotcha.
That's what he came up with, and
I don't know if I believe Bob.
And I was trying, and again, I'm not the lyrics guy, but I'm not seeing a whole lot of references into time. No. But Dylan claims that this was a big thing. But it was...
Let's just say, if you're going to either A, make a divorce album, or B, do a thing on time, and then you name it Blood on the Tracks, it fits real well with one thing and not on the other, right?
Not so much on the other, yeah. Although the title for Tangled Up in Blue did come from a phrase from the art professor, who basically was critical of Dylan's continuous use of the color of blue, and he told him once, your palette is all tangled up in blue. So that holds water. So Dylan initially thought that he would do this album with an electric backing band, but he wrote about 17 songs leading up to it. He played a number of them for other musicians, including David Crosby, Stephen Stills, and Graham Nash. Stills famously claimed after hearing it, he's a good songwriter, but he's no musician. So Dylan wants to do this with a full band. He calls his friend Mike Bloomfield, who had played with him before, and played him a number of the songs that Dylan was very excited about playing. But he plays them very fast, and he's kind of just ripping through one song to another. And Bloomfield got a little lost, saying, "He just did one after another, and I got lost. At that point, all the songs were in open D tuning. They all began to sound the same to me. They were all in the same key. They were all long. It was one of the strangest experiences of my life." So his attempt to get Bloomfield to participate in the full band recording didn't go well, and he decides at this point, let's make this more of a stripped down acoustic kind of album. And he goes into A&R recording studios in New York City in September of '74, and he starts laying down some of these tracks. He had a very spontaneous approach to recording. He did have some other members, session musicians there, a number of them from a band called the Deliverance Band, which also were known for the guys that did the dueling banjos from the movie Deliverance. And so he gets them in here, but he keeps changing things up and confusing a lot of these members. And some of them he had to kick out after just a couple days because they couldn't keep up with him. The session engineer, Phil Ramone, said, quote, "Sometimes he would have several bars, and in the next version he would change his mind about how many bars there should be in between a verse, or he'd eliminate a verse or add a chorus when you don't expect." So he was confusing everybody there. But after about 10 days, he cut the album. It was getting ready to be released before Christmas. However, after playing the record for his brother David Zimmerman, his brother tells him that he feared that the album would not sell well because it sounded too stark. And Dylan said, well, let's maybe take some of these songs and re-record them in Minneapolis. So he goes back to Minneapolis, and half of the songs that he had already recorded, he re-records with a more full band, and that includes Tangled Up in Blue, You're a Big Girl Now, Idiot Wind, Lily, Rosemary, and the Jack of Hearts, and If You See Her, Say Hello. The rest of the songs that you hear were from the New York sessions that were more stripped down.
So can you hear those like alternate takes?
You can, Josh. Wow, that was a softball. Yes, you can. They actually, the original recording was released on Record Store Day in 2019 on a limited release. But there's also part of, if you're familiar with Dylan's, the output that they keep coming out with, the bootleg series. One of the more recent bootleg series was an album called More Blood, More Tracks, and you can hear a lot of the takes, including the more stripped down acoustic versions of those songs, and they sound quite different, actually. So if you don't like them here, maybe you'll like them there. So again, Dylan says that he does not write confessional songs. In his memoir Chronicles Volume 1, he said that the songs have nothing to do with his personal life and that they were inspired by the short stories of Anton Chekhov. And I've never read
Chekhov's gun.
Yeah, that's what he's
that's his most notable. Yes, his most notable. Yep.
So,
are you familiar with Chekhov's gun, Matt, or do we need to clean that stack for you next week?
I'm not familiar with Chekhov's gun. No.
I'll learn you something. But or if you want to share now, Josh, feel free. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's the idea, at least in movies and plays, that if you see a gun in the first scene, it's going to come back and have some sort of importance or resonance by the final act.
Oh, does that
think
hold
like
water?
Usual Suspects, right? It's like the ultimate Chekhov's gun that you probably will know, like concept, Matt. Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, there's lots of examples of that.
Oh, I like that. That's interesting. Okay. So one other quote I would say that was interesting, Dylan says about this, I read that this was supposed to be about my wife. I wish somebody would ask me first before they go ahead and print stuff like that. It could be about anybody else but my wife, right? Stupid and misleading jerks these interpreters sometimes are. I don't write confessional songs. Emotions got nothing to do with it. It only seems so. It's like it seems that Laurence Olivier is Hamlet. So Dylan vehemently denying that this is about how to break up with his wife. The album was released to mixed reviews. John Landau wrote that the record has been made with typical shoddiness. Nick Kent from NME. Shoddiness,
really?
Yes.
Wow, okay.
NME Nick Kent described, quote, the accompanists often sound so trashy that they sound like practice takes.
So John Landau, guy who loved Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run, right? Doesn't like the Dylan album.
Doesn't like the musicians, the musicianship, apparently, yeah.
Wow, okay.
And Crawdaddy's magazine Jim Cusimano found the instrumentation incompetent. So, yeah, there was some definite people that did not like this. But Robert Christgau wrote that although the lyrics occasionally evoke romantic naivete and bitterness, Blood on the Tracks is altogether Dylan's most mature and assured record. And as a result of but in subsequent years, this album has actually been, held in higher regard, obviously. And an interesting thing that I read that I think is true that I've seen before, as a result of the acclaim surrounding it over the years. Usually when critics praise one of Dylan's subsequent albums, they often describe it as, quote, his best since Blood on the Tracks. And according to Rob Sheffield, Blood on the Tracks became a benchmark album for Dylan in the years that followed because it was such a stunning comeback from him. And I think that's true. If you listen, I've heard parts of the other albums, but this one definitely stands out. It's one of those albums that I think, it's considered his best album of the 70s. Rolling Stone put it at number 9 ahead of all the stuff in the 60s, which I found very surprising. So here you go. This is Dylan's Blood on the Tracks. It's actually the last Dylan album that we're covering in this segment. I think we're going to go do a couple of cold listens. So I have a couple of stuff, epilogues in the life of Bob Dylan. But I think it's time to start with John. Blood on the Tracks. What are your thoughts? Well,
Rolling Stone's right, because this is Bob Dylan's best album by, in my opinion, quite a bit, to be quite honest. I can't buy Dylan. Every song's about a romantic relationship, and he got divorced. He named an album Blood on the Tracks. Every song lyrically is about, yes, he writes some, although much less from, in my opinion, detached state than he normally does, right? Like, yes, he still brings in, like, the Jack of Hearts, right? Like, and Lily, and, the different stuff, like, which is also hilarious because John Landau doesn't like it while, like, literally Bruce Springsteen is doing all of Bob Dylan's tricks, which always cracks me up, too, like, on stuff like that. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out songs like You're a Big Girl Now and Shelter from the Storm and stuff like that are songs. You're Gonna Make Me Lonesome When You Go, right? I mean, I think Dylan likes the idea of having the detachment, but yeah, this is by far the closest Dylan's lyrics I think get to like his whatever he's feeling, because there are albums I absolutely believe he's writing detached, right? But that does not feel like this album. The funny thing with all the people criticize, I actually like this album musically better than I like almost any other Dylan album. I just like the structure of the songs. I think they build moods. It's a more mature Dylan, and I think that like there's this romanticism amongst people for like 60s like Greenwich Village Dylan that I think I've told you, and this is where he's kind of like Springsteen too. I don't think like he buys into the bullshit other people project onto him as much. And I think like this album represents like a grown man with grown man living, you know what I mean? Thinking about the world differently and thinking about the world in a more sophisticated manner. And I think that like his earlier stuff, yeah, they had a youthful exuberance to them, right? And a freewheeling nature, include the freewheeling Bob Dylan, right?
Yeah.
So, but this speaks to me more because this seems like someone who's, had success, been also critically, almost at times like reviled, right? Because the narrative was like, yeah, Dylan was a genius till he wasn't, right? And it's, I always thought that was just not how I saw it, because I as we talked about before, I liked those late 60s albums quite a bit by Bob Dylan. And, the early 70s stuff, I know he was taking more chances. And I just think he didn't want to be pigeonholed as like, I'm playing the guitar at this. And I can see why, because he'd gone as far as he could go. That's why he went electric. That's why he went country. That's why, he brings this one up. And I think for some degree, there's certain people that just always want to see Dylan in this like romantic idea of the youthful Dylan. And I kind of like the fact that there's multiple Dylans. I kind of like the fact that he's, well, I was going to say a little bit more self-aware. I think all the way down to like, I don't really want to talk about my divorce, so I'm just going to pretend this isn't about my divorce to not have to talk about it, right? But the lyrics here are classic Dylan, but they don't seem as wordy and at times sort of, much, I guess, would be the way that sometimes Dylan's lyrics for me are. And I think some of that is because you do see the theme, of like legitimate heartbreak. And he's writing about these characters with, there's like depending on the song, right? There's bitterness, there's sorrow, there's regret, for mistakes you make yourself. And so there's tenderness at times too. Standouts for me, I mean, Tangled Up in Blue gives you an idea of like what Dylan is, I think. And I like Tangled Up in Blue much better than most Stemwinder Dylan songs, where he's just giving you all the words, right, with just little bits of stuff. Like Tangled Up in Blue is my favorite of that type of song. Idiot Wind is right up there with Like a Rolling Stone in terms of like being bitter, kind of, and just writing it down and having an edge and an anger where and there's just something about when Dylan's in that mindset that I like, you know what I mean? It's raw, it's not detached, which he usually tries to go, so I enjoy that. And then, Pure Sadness, like You're Gonna Make Me Lonesome When You Go, and Shelter from the Storm is almost about being like a protector, which is not something you'd think of necessarily with Dylan songs. It's usually that rugged individualist type idea that's in there. I really, really like this album. It's my favorite Dylan album. Obviously I can't say for sure, because there might be some albums in the 70s we haven't touched, or, later work Dylan that I could listen to and go, oh my gosh, that's the hidden gem. But of the stuff I was aware of and we've listened to, this is my favorite. Strong thumbs up.
Well, you spoke much more eloquently about this album than I will. I'm probably going to come off as overly harsh on this album, but I didn't really respond to this album at all. And I kind of don't get what the big deal is. I thought, because Matt pointed out like he did all these different albums, I thought maybe this is higher praise because it's kind of a return to form for Dylan from the 60s, and maybe people didn't like those other experimental type of albums they did, and that's why this album is so highly praised. I think part of it is just, probably is part with the headspace I'm at with where we are in the decade and stuff, but I feel like with all the other artists that we've listened to, he just sounds the same as he did in the 60s, and I don't see the growth that John pointed out and that we see with all these other types of music, and even within the rock space. This just seems like the same formula that he did before, and I don't even see kind of the emotion that you pointed out in this album. I feel like he is always kind of detached, and that seems to be true here. It's still, is this album all acoustic, Matt? It seems like it is. No. Okay.
No. Yeah, no.
Half of it was, like Idiot Wind, Lily, Rosemary, and the Jack of Hearts, Tangled Up in Blue. There's acoustic instruments in it, but no, there's plenty of, there's songs in here and that's why he brought it back to Minneapolis, was to make it was more stark, like the original recordings in New York, but half the songs he beefed up a little bit with more production and more of a backing band, electric band.
Okay.
Yeah, there's even like pedal steel, isn't there, in this at different times? I think like Meet Me in the Morning, right? I think had some pedal steel in it.
Well, for some reason, all I heard is acoustic when I was listening to this. So again, I feel like that just harkens back to his kind of folk roots in the start before he went electric. And I thought that was just maybe another reason why people responded to it more. Maybe I need to check out some of those other lesser known, less popular albums, because I'd like to see where he, went and tried different things. I think I maybe would appreciate some of those things more, because I like, to contrast with Neil Young. Neil Young seems to be able to experiment and do different things within his artistic milieu. And I feel like, at least what we've heard of Bob Dylan, on the show, I don't see that branching out or that experimentation. But that again, that's clearly not the case, because he's done other things and he's made so many albums. Didn't he have a gospel period too at some point where, so, he's clearly interested in doing other things. So I can't fault him for that. It's just kind of what I hear on this album. The song structures sound the same, or similar to, he still has the long songs. I know I've harped on that before. It's still the kind of too many verses, songs, story structure in a lot of these songs. And I didn't feel like, well, I think Tangled Up in Blue and Shelter from the Storm are probably my favorite songs on the album, but I didn't feel like a strong pull towards any of the songs, or there didn't seem like any hidden gems to me either. So part of me just doesn't, I think part of me, probably rightly or wrongly, feels like I've kind of moved on from Bob Dylan at this point. Or, it's such a stark difference hearing Bob Dylan on Blood on the Tracks versus, On the Beach, which isn't the same year, right? Or close to. And just feeling so different about the artists. And even though Kraftwerk and Bowie and those albums came later, I feel like they're just in a totally different era than Bob Dylan is at this point. So I'm probably being a little unfair, and I probably need to listen to this album again, but I just didn't respond to it.
How many times did you listen to it?
Twice. So yeah.
Wow.
I know, a lot to chew on.
So I disagree with so much of what you said, and I'm trying to think of where I want to pick apart first. First of all, the idea that Dylan hasn't evolved or changed is okay. He's not experimenting. Dylan doesn't experiment with sounds or production or anything. That's not what he's about. But his evolution is absolutely clear. And starkly different from one stage to the next. I mean, when you talk, whether you're talking about, him just being a folk artist in Greenwich Village, moving on to an electric artist, kind of going back to a more stripped down version, and then going in the country direction. He is changing a lot of his the purpose behind his music, the different types of genres that he's exploring, and he alienated a lot of people, because people wanted him, they liked a certain version of him, and he did something totally different, and then they kind of went back against that. This album, I don't know how you don't hear the emotion in this, whether it's through the lyrics or through the music. There's some of Dylan's most beautifully written songs melodically I find in this record. This is the first real album that I listened to, the Bob Dylan album that I listened to, and I think it's a great entry-level Dylan album. If somebody were to ask me, where do I start with Bob Dylan, I think I might point them here. I think that this album is an more easily palatable record. I agree with John. It's definitely a more mature sounding record, if not lyrically, just even musically. Like there's a focus and a structure behind pretty much all of these songs that stand out a little bit, and they sound a little bit more weathered. They sound a little bit more from an experienced person, even though there's kind of some youthful angle, like Idiot Wind, I agree. It's an angry song. And that's one of the things John brought up, comparing that to, what is it?
Like a Rolling Stone.
Thank you, like a Rolling Stone. Like that's people like that's the first song he did that was like that since then. So there is still kind of that energy behind it, but this album is this is a beautiful record. Overall, it's just got Shelter from the Storm, beautiful song. If You See Her Say Hello might be the saddest song on here. I mean, that's just such a I could just hear the pain in his voice, singing about that. I love Meet Me in the Morning. He does a little acoustic blues song in there, which kind of stands out as unique. I always love that. But Buckets of Rain, You're Gonna Make Me Lonesome When You Go. Beautiful, beautiful songs. Just really, heart-wrenching songs that are just, that are just really, really well done. I think the only song on here that I kind of get a little, tired of or just not as big a fan of is Lily Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts. I think that could be about cut in half.
I would agree with you on that. That's the worst impulses of sometimes. Yeah, and
that one stands out a little bit because that's like more of a narrative story about that kind of goes back to like some of the stuff that he was doing in the 60s, like Bob Dylan's Dream, where he's just describing the scene of
it. Also,
these people.
Is the only one that feels detached. And that's why it stands out, because the rest of this album is so starkly emotional, and then that one's kind of like, all right, we're gonna go back to the Queen of Hearts, and it's like, ugh, it doesn't fit. Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't fit. And then he goes back to, like you said, probably the saddest song on the album afterwards. And you're right, Matt. That's absolutely true.
And it's kind of goofy, like that bass, like do do do. It's like this kind of upbeat, kind of goofy sound. I almost like the and that's kind of, if it might be interesting to compare that with the acoustic version that he did do first, because it's totally different. I kind of almost like that better, but even that's a little too long. But no, this album is phenomenal. I don't know if I would say it's my favorite Dylan album. I really do like the 1-2 punch of the Highway 61 revisited and Bringing It All Back Home. So it's like this, but this one's up there. This is I think Dylan, the Dylan-esque, like the voice of Dylan that can be off-putting to people. I think it's a little bit more palatable here than maybe in some of those other records. And
that's true.
I don't know. I agree, John. I don't know why so many people were shitting on the musicianship of this. I'm like, what's the big issue with it? You know what I mean? Like it's not amazing, like it's not virtuoso musicians or anything like that, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I think I just think it's a really balanced album. It's at the 51 mark, so it's getting into long territory, but this to me is a very easy listen, and it's a beautiful record. And like I said, I think it's a great entry level place to go. And Josh, I don't know. I don't know if you need to hear it more. I don't know how you don't hear the emotion here, because it's a sad album, but it's very beautiful, very heartfelt. And whatever Dylan says, I'm not getting time. I'm not getting the confluence of the present, the past, and the future here. I'm getting like heartbreak and divorce, and it's a wonderful record.
Yeah, it's like an elegy, isn't it? In some ways, that's how I always hear this album. So, yeah.
And Matt, is this the highest rated Dylan album on the Rolling Stone?
No, I think this is 3. I'm sorry, on Rolling Stone, yes, it's number 9. So it's but on Best Ever Albums, they got Highway 61 at 24 overall, Blonde on Blonde at 31 overall, and this is 44 overall. So yeah, this is, I don't know, if I would encourage people to start here, because even though I wouldn't say that this is representative of his most well-known stuff or the stuff that really made him famous, but I think just musically, I think that this is an easier record to really get into overall.
Yeah, I would agree. This falls in like how Nashville Skyline, when he's singing a little bit more and his voice like isn't sort of artist as abrasive. I'm not gonna say abrasive for the sake of being abrasive, but it just hits you over the head. This one you can definitely that's I will say, Josh, I was shocked you didn't hear emotion in this, because that's also what stands out to me. This is like by far the most he sounds like an emotional being.
Yeah.
Whereas the rest he's sort of like bard telling a story, at times, which can get a lot, at times. But this one I never got that, because he doesn't feel like, with the exception of Lily Rosemary and Jack of Hearts, he doesn't take on sort of that storyteller bard role as much, I feel like, because he's the subject. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, so it sounds like 2 thumbs up and 1. I don't know, are you thumbs down, Josh, or are you thumbs in the middle, would you say? Sounds like you're thumbs down.
Yeah, I'm thumbs down.
It's okay.
I'm just confused, I think. I don't know.
You don't have to like an album. Just
I know.
Do, yeah.
There's always that tension between, as we've said before, something that's so highly praised and you not responding to it. I feel like there's something wrong, but yeah, for whatever reason, at least this week, right? It didn't hit me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll have different takes on albums that people love. I'm certain of it. I mean, we haven't even gotten to Matt doing rap yet, so that's going to be a hilarious juxtaposition right there. So
2 thumbs way up on that one.
That's There's rap I like, I think.
Oh, I know. I'm just saying it's going to be as foreign for you, some of that stuff, Matt, as krautrock was.
It's all good. It's all good. I don't mind learning. Well, so this is the last time we're covering Dylan in a regular episode. We're going to do a couple of cold listens for him, I believe. But so I just wanted to cover a couple of things here. What the things that he's done afterwards, which is many. But Josh, you did mention his gospel period. He did convert to evangelical Christianity in the late 70s and did put out 3 gospel records, if you can believe that.
Yeah.
Jerry Wexler, who produced these some of those albums for Dylan at this time, said that Dylan would actually try to convert him during the recordings. and Wexler would respond, quote, "Bob, you're dealing with a 62-year-old Jewish atheist. Let's just make an album." He sings on We Are the World's USA for Africa's We Are the World in 85 and also performs at Live Aid. In 1986, he delves into rap. Speaking of rap, he does the intro rap for Curtis Blow's Street Rock. It's not good.
I bet.
In 86 and 87, he tours with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, as well as the Grateful Dead. And then in 88, he formed the Traveling Wilburys with Roy Orbison, George Harrison, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne. And he did some of his most successful commercial songs with that band of his entire career. In 1997, he released his Time Out of Mind, which won a Grammy for Album of the Year and was considered. That was one of those albums that was saying, people were like, "Oh, this is his best album since Blood on the Tracks."
I think it was also hard to pick up from the album stores from all of the spooge from the critics that stuck into
they do that, and they also
slippery when wet.
And
I remember that one, yeah.
And talk about this is where you see Dylan's voice is totally. If you hear him sing now, man, it doesn't sound. It's his voice is. It's rough. But he wins an Oscar for the song Things Have Changed for the film Wonder Boys, and I think that was 2000. Love and Theft is released on September 11, 2001. I think we are going to cover that one in a cold listen hot take. And he releases an autobiography. He starts a radio show on XM Radio in 2006. He does a Christmas album in 2009 called Christmas in the Heart. That's a hysterical Christmas album. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Obama in 2012. He launched his own brand of whiskey in 2018 called Heaven's Door,
which I've heard is pretty good, actually.
You can buy a bottle for like $70.
Yep.
I talked to you about More Blood, More Tracks that was released in 2018. And in December of 2020, he sold his entire song catalog.
I read that, yeah.
To Universal Music Publishing Group. This included the copyright to over 600 songs for more than $300 million. Some reports actually estimated it was closer to $400 million. So he does not own the rights to any of his songs anymore. He's published 8 books of paintings and drawings and was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988 by none other than Bruce Springsteen.
Well, yeah.
The never-ending tour, his tour that he's still doing, it's not ending, began on June 7th, 1988, and he's played roughly 100 dates a year since.
Didn't he say he sold his soul to the devil or something, and the trade-off was he had to tour his entire life?
Keep touring.
That's a lot, yeah. I think that's the quote I read, yeah.
And he released his 39th studio album, Rough and Rowdy Ways, on June 19th, 2020, and he turned 80 years old this year on May 24th. He is still going strong.
God bless him, man. I love the fact he's always future-looking, too.
He looks older than 80 in my
He sure
opinion,
does
nowadays.
And when
Really?
and when you see,
something.
and I'm telling you, when you see him play live, if you saw him play
we
live,
saw him.
Oh, we did see him. That's right.
Yeah.
But when we see him play live, and he will play stuff from the 60s. It's not like he's just doing my most recent album. He'll play all the hits. You just don't know they're the hits because he plays them nothing like what you know them of, and it's hard to understand what he's singing. So I remember sitting there, what's he singing? And I wouldn't know. Like 3-4 verses later, I'm like, oh, this is blown in the wind, right? You know what I mean? Like it takes you forever to figure out what he's doing. So people are. If you go see a Bob Dylan show, don't expect him to play the hits the way that you want to hear
Clearly.
them. You're gonna hear them the way that he feels like playing them that night.
Yeah, I can remember my dad having a strong take one time where he's like, "Bob, come on, man! Like seriously, like come on!" Like I was having a dialogue with the TV while watching him, and this was like 20 years ago.
Yeah, no. Josh and I saw him. He played on a tour with Wilco and My Morning Jacket, and I think it went My Morning Jacket, Wilco, and then Dylan. And I'm like, I think you should have reversed that order, So I think I left early for that too. I was like, yeah, I'm good. I love Bob, but I'm good.
Yeah, there comes a point, right?
Have you guys heard any of these other 70s albums that he
I haven't.
He's done a lot.
Not the album. Yeah, he's done a lot. There's songs that you'll recognize from some of them, like "Knocking on Heaven's Door." "The Man in Me" is the opening track to Big Lebowski.
Wasn't the Hurricane on one of them too?
Hurricane's on Desire. Yeah, and we're gonna.
That's
I think
what we're
that's on
covering.
Desire. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we covered Desire. Okay.
We're gonna do Desire and a Cold Listen, and then we're gonna do Love and Theft, which was several decades away. But yeah.
Gotcha.
Yep.
All right.
All right. Well,